There is nothing interesting about Angels, Chapter 3. You would think it would be easy to predict what she would come home to each day. Cecilia had found this not to be the case. Every day was a new experience for her. One evening she had come home from work to find Chloe carefully examining one of her CDs. She had been holding it up to the light and chattering at it. When Cecilia had asked her what she was doing, Chloe had simply advised her to throw the CD out, that the hidden message was not really good for her mind and would have long-term negative consequences if she did not discard it immediately. When Cecilia suggested mailing the CD to one of her customers, Chloe criticized her choice of vengeance and began suggesting alternatives that made Cecilia's skin crawl. As Cecilia arrived home from work, something felt off. As she unlocked the front door, she could feel the doorknob vibrate. She frowned. More music? Was she going to have to ask Chloe to take a break? When your humming vibrates the front door, you have crossed a line. She stepped inside and gasped, then began choking on dust. She ducked out of the apartment in a coughing fit, her eyes filling and overflowing with tears. When she had caught her breath, she put her grocery bags on the ground to the side of the door and covered her nose and mouth with her sweater and stepped back inside her home. Everywhere there was a layer of dust. "Chloe," she called out. No one answered. At least she had cleaned the windows. They were so clear now you could hardly tell they were there. Now they would have more birds crashing into them. Maybe those birds would come back to life and fly away, enhanced by the process. She crossed the room to open the windows, but as she reached out, her hand met nothing but air. For one jarring moment, she looked down. There was nothing preventing her from falling. She shuddered. "What is this, Chloe?" she called out, going to retrieve her groceries. She carried the bag into the kitchen. She needed some water. She opened the cupboard. Out poured more dust, and all of the cups were gone. She was trying to figure out how she was going to clean up and keep her nose and mouth covered when the dust cleared in a great sweeping motion that Cecilia did not have time to follow with her eyes, but felt as a steady pressure moving along her back and chest. She had closed her eyes as a lighter breeze tickled her face, and when she opened them again, the glass was back where it belonged and a hand was on her back. She began to cough again, and it felt as if she would never stop coughing. The hand kept patting her back until she coughed out a handful of red-tinted dust. "What did you do, Cecilia?" Chloe asked. "I didn't do this. How would I do something like this?" Cecilia gestured around herself at where the mess had been. Everything was spotless. "Not this. I mean this that was here before you did that." "Tell me about your dream last night." Cecilia got herself a glass of water and took a seat in the living room. Chloe followed her. "When I was at work today, I heard this horrible high-pitched sound over the phone line, but when I listened to the call after, the sound was not on the recording. So something in the space must have reached out to you while I was out. I can try to trace it back and figure out what it was, but before I do that..." She paused for several seconds. "Yes?" Cecilia asked, gesturing for her roommate to continue. "Your dream?" she asked. "I'm not ready to see things like that, to go that deep. It's too much. It's starting to make sense, and when I look out there," she wiggled her fingers in front of her face, moving her hand outward, "I feel drawn further out, and I feel watched." "Okay, go make dinner, and I'll see if I can track what was reaching out to you," she said in a soft, lulling tone, her gaze distant again. Cecilia got to her feet and hesitantly moved away from Chloe. She wanted to say more or ask more questions, but no words came to mind, so she moved on. In the fridge, she could see that the vegetables she had used the night before had been replaced and multiplied. Now there were 3 peppers, 3 carrots, and a whole bag of snap peas. A glass bowl was filled with what she could only assume were the strange vegetables, prepared and cooked ahead of time in case she wanted to try them. "Are you sure these things are safe to eat?" she called out, pulling the glass bowl out of the fridge. Chloe didn't answer. Cecilia prepared stir-fry, adding in the strange vegetables at the last moment just to warm them. She made a pot of jasmine tea and carried everything to the table, placing the stir-fry in the middle, along with the pot of rice and the pot of tea, and she placed cups, plates, and utensils out neatly in front of their usual seats. Chloe sat down at the table and poured tea for the both of them and served herself some of the rice and stir-fry. Cecilia did take a small amount of rice and stir-fry and tentatively poked at one of the strange vegetables. It was green and bumpy and looked a bit like a little flower. Chloe smiled. Cola buds. Cecilia speared it with her fork and took a small bite. Not bad, a bit like asparagus. There have been a few times when I've seen you sitting at your desk, looking into the mirror, and I wondered what you were doing. You stay there after you finish doing your makeup and you look into the mirror. Have you ever felt like you were making a connection with it, as if you wanted to reach out and touch a part of the mirror, intimately? Cecilia blushed. No. What are you suggesting? She stared Chloe down, color coming to her cheeks. I look at my face, and my eyes look different in the mirror, like I'm shifting into someone else, someone bolder, sexier, stronger. It would be narcissistic if I wanted to be intimate with my reflection. What are you suggesting? Chloe made her puzzled head tilt and took a sip of her tea. I am trying to say that something is trying to reach out to you from the mirror. Something that has become familiar with you over the years and become accustomed to the familiarity and tenderness with which you observe it. And you think that being reached out to me and made a mess. The fear it must have felt as it did that, I know what that feels like. It is asking for your help. How do I help someone like that? How would I even begin? She took a bite of her food, staring at the strange colors and textures in her bowl to avoid looking at Chloe. It begins, Chloe stated simply, with you telling me what you have been dreaming about. Cecilia abruptly shoveled a generous forkful of food into her mouth and spoke around, a child avoiding the heart of a question. It's nothing, just She swallowed. Night terrors, my mum called them. Cecilia picked up her tea and gratefully burned her tongue as she gulped the piping hot liquid. Shit. She felt Chloe's eyes boring into her back as she guzzled a glass of cold water at the sink. The atmosphere of the room felt close and heavy, like a storm was building. Cecilia took a deep breath and turned to face her friend to discover that Chloe wasn't seated at the table anymore. Confused, Cecilia walked into the living room, then down the hallway. After checking Chloe's room, she finally discovered her seated at the vanity. Cecilia hesitated at the door as if it wasn't her own room, and frowned as she watched Chloe open the foundation and select a fresh beauty blender. Chloe picked up every brush and eye pen with precise and flowing movements. It took Cecilia a moment to recognize that this was the same routine she had observed her mirror image following each and every morning. She was sure that Chloe had never seen her do this, and yet each selection was an exact replica of what Cecilia herself had done this morning before leaving the house. A cold chill crawled up her spine. Chloe, what do you think you're doing? Chloe's eyes never left the mirror. Yet Cecilia felt as if she were being closely observed. She wondered, in a moment of hysteria, is this what the wall felt like? Chloe's voice seemed distant and hollow. I am waiting. Cecilia gripped the door jamb, unsure if she was resisting fleeing down the hall or if she was straining to avoid being pulled into the room. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body seemed to think that the thing to run from was outside of the room, not inside it. Frozen with fear and indecision, she gasped a deep belly breath and tried to hold it for the count of 3. Chloe had finished with the makeup and was now doing something that Cecilia had never seen from this angle. She raised the finger of one hand to her cheek, hovering slightly above the skin, and followed the eyeliner from temple to temple. Simultaneously, her other hand reached forward and traced the same line on the Chloe in the mirror. Clean and clear, each line perfect. Cecilia shivered as she heard her own voice issued from someone else. Chloe's fingers finished the tracing, and she turned her hands and ran the backs down the twin faces. Hello, beautiful. Ready to start the day? Watching from the door, Cecilia saw the shift. The mirror was no longer reflecting Chloe. The being looking back at her roommate was monstrous? She felt bad to even think the thought. How had she ever mistaken this for her reflection? How had she ever believed that the face looking back at her in this moment was human? The pupils were black but surrounded by a circle of white. The nose was pointed and slightly turned up. The teeth were pointy and pearly white. She didn't have any eyebrows, just a smooth forehead that blended into a mass of smoke that curled upwards. The reflection in front of her then, close enough to touch. The reflection was in front of her then, close enough to touch. Then she blinked, and it was back in the mirror. Had she really seen what she thought she had seen? It was just Chloe's reflection. a reflection that was making the slow hissing sounds that Chloe never made. Then the mirror went black. Chloe nodded, as if this is what she had been expecting, and got to her feet.